Welcome back to The Deep. If you're like us, you probably know George Orwell. Well, not just as an author, but maybe as this prophetic voice, right? His warnings about totalitarianism, they just feel incredibly relevant today.
More and more so, it seems.
But how did he get there? How did the man behind, Big Brother, Newspeak, The Thought Police, how did he develop that really chilling insight?
Well, that's exactly what we want to dig into today. That's our mission, really. We want to trace the path of the man who started life as Eric Arthur Blair.
Right.
From this privileged colonial background, though maybe not as straightforwardly wealthy as you might think, to becoming this fierce anti-Stalinist raider, the one who basically mapped out the whole architecture of mind control.
So we're looking for the source material, the raw experiences behind Animal Farm in 1984.
Precisely. The life and death stuff, the things he saw and lived through that gave him those, terrifying insights.
Okay, let's unpack this right from the start then. His birth, June 25th, 1903, in Motihari, Bengal, India. This is the height of the British Empire.
Absolutely peak British Empire. And his family wasn't just in the system. They were pretty deeply embedded.
Yeah, to tell us about that initial snapshot, the Blair family, because it seems key to understanding the sort of moral conflicts that came later for Orwell.
It really is. His father, Richard Blair, held a position in the opium department of the Indian Civil Service. He was essentially an opium.
An opium agent?
Yeah. He oversaw the production and storage of this incredibly lucrative drug, mostly destined for export to China. This wasn't some minor bureaucratic role. It was a key part of the imperial economy.
So hang on. The money flowing back to Britain, supporting the empire, a significant chunk was tied to the opium.
A very significant chunk. It was systemic. So the very basis of Eric Blair's early life, his family's position, it rested on this systematic imperial exploitation, effectively drug trafficking, albeit state-sanctioned.
That's quite something. Born into institutional hypocrisy from day one.
You could definitely say that. And it surely must have resonated later, this deep revulsion he developed against systems that preach virtue while profiting from, something pretty dark.
Okay, so that's the imperial context. What about the family's actual standing? You mentioned it wasn't straightforward wealth.
Right. So while the Blairs had these sort of fading connections to aristocracy, the actual family money was largely gone by the time Eric. They were solidly upper middle class, yes, but not rich.
So he's aware of privilege, but maybe feels a bit on the edge of it.
Exactly. He grew up intensely aware of the British class system, the nuances of status and money. He saw the structure, he benefited from it to a degree, but he also felt that lack of real financial clout compared to, say, his wealthier schoolmates later on.
And this sets up that core conflict, doesn't it? The expected path versus the chosen one.
Absolutely. He was supposed to follow in his father's footsteps, become a respectable civil servant, uphold the empire, but he chose something radical. Writer, tramp, eventually a committed socialist.
So our plan today is to look at the key moments, the pivots in his life, based on the sources we have, that really forged George Orwell out of Eric Blair. You mentioned 7 major ones.
That's the idea. 7 key phases or experiences that shifted his trajectory and shaped his worldview, ultimately leading to those famous warnings.
Okay, let's dive into the first section then. The making of an outsider, covering roughly 1903 to 1927. Class, empire, education.
Right. So we've established that paradox of privilege, upper middle class, but financially aware, maybe even pure. And there's another factor we shouldn't overlook, something mentioned in the sources.
What's that?
His health. He was apparently quite sickly right from infancy. Chronic lung problems. These plagued him his entire life and tragically contributed to his early death.
That adds another layer, doesn't it? Physical fragility on top of the social awareness makes him even more of an observer, perhaps.
Potentially. It certainly set him apart. Now, his mother had high hopes for his education. In 1911, he starts at St. Cyprian's. This was a prep school specifically designed to get boys into the big public schools like...
And he was good at it, academically.
Oh, brilliant. He won prizes in English and classics, clearly had the intellectual gift.
But it wasn't a happy experience.
Far from it, according to Orwell himself. Decades later, he wrote this absolutely scathing essay, something like 15,000 words long, just detailing his hatred for St. Cyprian's.
What did he criticize?
Well, pretty much everything. The frequent beatings, the awful food, the poor living conditions. But crucially, he highlighted the blatant favoritism shown to the children of wealthier families, the ones paying the full fee, compared to scholarship boys like himself.
Okay, but there's a bit of a wrinkle here, isn't there? Some debate about how accurate that essay was.
There is. Some of his contemporaries, his schoolmates, later suggested that Orwell might have, let's say, embellished things somewhat. That maybe the conditions weren't quite as dire, or the beatings as frequent as he portrayed them.
So what do we make of that? Does it undermine his later critiques if the foundation is maybe slightly exaggerated?
That's the fascinating question, isn't it? But I think for understanding Orwell, the feeling is what matters most. Whether every detail was perfectly accurate or not, the experience of feeling socially inferior, of believing the system was rigged towards wealth, even though he was intellectually gifted, that became his reality.
Right, that subjective sense of injustice, that shaped his perception.
Absolutely. It defined how he saw institutions, power structure. And this carried over to which he attended from 1917 as a scholar.
King's Scholar, so again, intellectually elite, but maybe not socially.
Precisely. He was there on merit, fee exempt, part of this top academic tier. But socially, he was still seen as below the majority of boys whose families just paid the hefty fees. He lived that dissonance. Intellectually capable, maybe even superior, but always slightly on the outside socially.
And this actually affected his studies at Eton.
It seems so. His academic performance really dropped off. Maybe he relaxed. Maybe he rejected the whole competitive grind required for, Oxbridge. Sources say he came bottom in his Latin class at one point. Yeah. And he was eventually transferred to less demanding classical general studies. That pretty much torpedoed any chance of getting into Oxford or...
So the academic ladder he'd climbed via scholarship just broke.
Effectively, yeah. And without the prospect of a top university and without the family funds for a lesser one, his options really narrowed.
Which pushed him back towards the path he seemed to be trying to escape.
Exactly. Back towards the imperial civil service. His father, Richard Blair, really pushed for it. A secure, respectable career was seen as the only viable option.
So reluctantly, he goes for it.
He does. He passed the entrance exam in June 1922 for the Indian Imperial Police. And interestingly, he specifically requested to be posted to Burma.
Why Burma?
Apparently, his mother had spent part of her childhood there, so there was a family. But it was also seen as, well, a bit of backwater, perhaps offering more independence than a posting in India proper.
So he arrives in Burma late 1922. What was the reality on the ground? What did police work actually involve there?
Well, first, you need to understand why the British were even in Burma. It wasn't primarily for benevolent reasons. It was annexed for commercial gain, cheap rice, teak wood, oil. British rule was essentially a military occupation dressed up as civil administration.
And Orwell steps right into that as a police officer.
Yes. He found himself administering a territory with a really high crime. One source mentions 800 murders in 1924, something like 16,000.
That's intense for a young man, barely out of school.
Absolutely. He's suddenly in charge of police stations, intelligence gathering, leading patrols, even exercising judicial function. He learned Burmese quickly, apparently, but he was the face of this occupying power.
And dealing with a harsh environment, too.
Very harsh. Scorching heat, torrential monsoons, constant risk of diseases like malaria and dengue fever, plus wildlife encounters, snake, tigers. It was physically demanding.
So this is where that complex moral conflict really takes hold. He's part of the machine he's starting to resent.
Exactly. He sees the brutality of the imperial system firsthand. He's administering it. This feeds directly into essays like Shooting an Elephant, where he talks about the psychological burden of being a colonist, hating the dirty work of empire.
But it wasn't just a simple case of empire bad, locals good.
No, and this is crucial for understanding Orwell's later nuance. He was definitely critical of British rule, profoundly so, but sources also suggest he was sometimes shocked or disturbed by certain local customs or practices that Europeans at the time viewed as backward or primitive.
So he wasn't romanticizing the oppressed either.
Not entirely. He saw the flaws, the complexities, the moral ambiguities on both sides. That ability to critique power without necessarily idealizing its victims, that's a hallmark that runs right through his work, especially animal.
This internal conflict must have been immense. How long did he last?
4.5 years. Stuck it out until 97. Then, while on leave back in England, he made the decisive break.
He just quit.
He announced his resignation, said he intended to become a writer. This, as you can imagine, did not go down well with his family.
Bitter reaction, the sources say.
Yes, particularly from his father. It caused a serious estrangement that lasted for years. This was the moment Eric Blair definitively chose a different path. He chose essentially moral conviction and artistic ambition over security and societal expectations. The writer was starting to emerge.
Okay, so he's back in England in 1927. He's rejected the empire, alienated his family to some extent. What now? How does he become a writer?
Well, he needs material, right? And perhaps more importantly, he feels this powerful need to understand the lives of the poor and the marginalized, the people at the bottom of the system he just left. This leads to the next phase, what you could call research through death.
He becomes a tramp.
He intentionally immerses himself in poverty. It seems to be driven by a mix of genuine sympathy, maybe some guilt from his back, but also a very practical need for literary material. He starts these tramping expeditions.
So he's dressing down, going into rough areas.
Exact. Puts on ragged clothes, deliberately sheds his upper middle class markers, and spends time in London's East End, places like Limehouse, living among the working class and the destitute.
And this wasn't just in London.
No, his commitment was pretty serious. In 1928, he moves to Paris. Now, he had an Aunt Nellie living nearby who could have easily helped him financially.
But he didn't take the help.
He refused it. He chose to live in, well, genuine squalor. He got a job as a plongeur, a dishwasher in a hotel, working alongside a Russian friend. He experienced the filth, the exhaustion, the sheer grind of low-paid, precarious work first.
This is the basis for Down and Out in Paris and London.
That's right. It came directly from these experiences. He wasn't just observing poverty. He was living the dehumanizing aspects of it. The long hours, the poor conditions, the lack of respect.
It strikes me that this experience must have informed his ideas about surveillance, too. The feeling of being constantly judged, scrutinized when you're poor.
That's a really interesting point, that sense of being watched, of having no privacy, of being powerless under the gaze of authority. You can definitely see echoes of that later in 84.
There's an anecdote about his time hop-picking in Kent, isn't there? About his accent.
Yes, in 1931, he was trying hard to fit in, adopting a Cockney accent. But sometimes, apparently, especially when tired or stressed, his natural, more educated accent would slip out.
And how did the other hop pickers react? Did they see him as an imposter?
Surprisingly, no. According to the accounts, they generally concluded he must be someone from a better background who had genuinely come down in the world. And this actually elicited more sympathy, not less.
That's fascinating. So even in poverty, his inherent class background gave him a sort of a strange advantage.
It seems so. A kind of residual respect or pity that perhaps someone born into that life wouldn't receive. It highlights that complex, almost inescapable nature of class identity that he wrestled.
Which probably fueled his writing even more. When did he actually start publishing under the name George Orwell?
That came about when his literary agent, Leonard Moore, was trying to get his first book, The Paris and London Memoirs, then called A Scullion's Diary, published. Eric Blair himself insisted on using a pseudonym.
Why? Was he ashamed of the content or just wanted a different identity?
Probably a mix, perhaps protecting his family from embarrassment, but also likely wanting to create a distinct authorial persona. He chose George.
Why those names specifically?
He apparently wanted a good, round English. George came from St. George, the patron saint of England, representing English. And Orwell is the name of a river in Suffolk, an area he knew and liked. It sounded solid, traditional, maybe a bit earthy.
So in 1933, Down and Out in Paris and London is published, and George Orwell, the author, is born.
Yes, he's finally a published author, age 29, and his next major work drew directly on that other defining experience, Burma.
Burmese Days, published in 1934.
Right. It's set in a fictional town, clearly based on Keita, his last posting, and it's a pretty bleak, cynical novel.
Tell us about the plot, briefly. How does it reflect his experience?
The protagonist is John Flory, a timber merchant who feels alienated from the racist, prejudiced European. He tries to defend his Indian friend, Dr. Veeraswamy, against the schemes of a corrupt Burmese mad Yupo Kin.
It sounds like a story about the impossibility of bridging divides.
Very much so. And it ends tragically. Yupo Kin manipulates events, bribes Flory's Burmese mistress to publicly expose their relationship, destroying Flory's reputation. Flory, seeing no way out, despairs and commits suicide.
Wow. It really captures that sense of entrapment and moral compromise he must have felt.
Absolutely. The stifling atmosphere of the colonial outpost, the hypocrisy, the lack of escape, it's all there.
He wrote another novel around this time, too, The Clergyman's Daughter.
Yes, in 1935. This one drew more on his experiences tramping and his time in rural Suffolk. But it's interesting, Orwell himself really disliked this novel.
Disliked it how?
He felt it was clumsy, maybe too conventional. He actually requested that it not be reprinted during his lifetime. He was still searching, I think, for the right form, the right way to express his social and political concerns effectively.
And that search led him more explicitly towards politics.
It seems that way. A key development happened in late 1930. He got a part-time job at a bookshop in Hampstead, London. Crucially, this came with accommodation.
So stability.
Yeah.
And access to the literary scene.
Exact. It gave him a permanent base in London and plugged him into the intellectual currents of the time. And the bookshop owners were important figures in his political development.
How so?
They were long-standing members of the Independent Labour Party, ILP.
ILP. Remind us what that was again?
It was a democratic socialist party in Britain, distinct from the main Labour Party. It was generally more radical, more internationalist, and critically, strongly anti-Stalinist even back then.
So this exposure solidified his move towards social.
It certainly seems to have crystallized things. His existing anti-imperialism, his deep sense of fairness, his experiences with poverty, they all naturally drew him towards the socialist ideas circulating in that environment.
And this leads directly to The Road to Wigan Pier.
Yes. In 1936, he was commissioned by the Left Book Club, run by Victor Gallant, to investigate and write about the conditions of the working class in the industrial north of England during the Great Depression.
So back to immersive research, like the tramp.
Absolutely. He traveled to places like Manchester, Wigan, Barnsley, Sheffield, and Leeds. He kept meticulous diaries, lived in lodging houses, went down coal mines, observed the grinding poverty, the terrible housing, the sheer physical toll of unemployment and industrial labor.
The book is famous for its two halves, right?
Yeah.
The reportage and then his personal, more political reflection.
That's right. The first half is this powerful, visceral description of what he saw. The second half is more autobiographical and a defense of socialism, but also a critique of some socialists he found doctrinaire or out of touch.
But during this research trip, something else happened, something that shifted his focus again.
Yes, something profoundly disturbed. While he was in the North, he witnessed fascism in action.
How? What did he see?
He attended a rally in Barnsley, addressed by Sir Oswald Mosley, the leader of the British Union of Fascists.
Mosley in his black shirts.
Exactly. And Orwell was apparently struck by two things, both deeply unsettling. First, the overt violence and intimidation used by Mosley's black shirt supporters. But second, and perhaps more chillingly, Mosley's actual effectiveness as an orator.
His ability to persuade.
Yes. His charisma, his ability to manipulate the audience, to tap into their grievances, even while promoting this hateful ideology. Orwell saw firsthand how authoritarianism seduced, how it could package lies effectively.
So it wasn't just the poverty that shocked him, but the potential for political manipulation and control.
Precise. This experience, seeing Mosley's appeal and methods up close, seems to have really sharpened his focus on the dangers of political rhetoric, propaganda, and the willingness of crowds to follow a strongman. It was a crucial stepping stone towards the themes that would dominate.
Which leads us directly into the next major phase, right? The Spanish Civil War.
Absolutely. His witnessing of fascism in Britain seems to have galvanized him. When the Spanish Civil War broke out in July 1936 as a military coup against the elected Republican government, he felt he couldn't just stand by.
So he went to Spain. What was his motivation? Just to report?
No, much more than that.
What?
He initially intended to perhaps write some articles to spread awareness among the English working class about the fight against fascism. But fundamentally, he went there to fight.
To physically take up arms.
Yes. He believed in the Republican cause and wanted to contribute directly. And his choice of which unit to join was incredibly significant.
He joined the POUM militia,
Yeah.
connected to the ILP back in Britain.
That's right. The POUM, the Workers' Party of Marxist Unification. It was a relatively small revolutionary socialist group, but crucially, it was independent of and often critical of the Soviet Union and the Spanish Communist Party. They were anti-Stalinist Marxists.
So ideologically, he's aligning himself with a faction that's already potentially at odds with the bigger players on the Republic.
Exactly. And that choice put him right in the crosshairs of the internal political struggles that would later consume the Republic.
What was his actual frontline experience like?
He was sent to the Aragon front near Zaragoza. Conditions were apparently quite primitive, often static trench warfare, lack of proper weapons and supply. He described it as less like modern war and more like something out of, well, an earlier era, mostly patrol duty, boredom, cold.
But he did see action. He wasn't just sitting in a trench.
Oh, he saw action. Sources mention his bravery. There's an account of him throwing a captured bomb during a nationalist counterattack, which helped cover his unit's retreat. He experienced the danger and discomfort of the front.
But the real turning point wasn't the fighting against Franco's forces, was it? It was the infighting within the Republican side.
That was the devastating political education. In late April 1937, he went on leave to Barcelona, and he walked right into what became known as the Maze.
What happened in Barcelona?
Basically, the Central Republican government, which was increasingly influenced and supplied by the Soviet Union through the Spanish Communist Party, decided to crack down on the more independent revolutionary factions, particularly the anarchists and them.
They turned on their own allies.
Yes. Soviet advisors saw groups like the POUM as politically unreliable, as Trotskyists, enemies within the revolution. They used the civil guard, loyal to the central government, to try and seize control of key buildings held by the worker militia. Street fighting broke out.
And Orwell was caught in the middle of this.
Right in the thick of it. He ended up spending 3 days barricaded on a rooftop with other POUM members, exchanging fire with forces who were supposedly on the same side in the larger war against Franco.
That must have been incredibly disillusioning. Fighting fascists only to be shot at by communists.
It was the ultimate shock, the betrayal of the revolution as he saw it. Truth, comradeship, the initial ideals, all sacrificed for centralized political control, dictated largely from Moscow.
And the danger didn't end there. He got wounded.
After the May Day subsided, he returned to the front line, and on May 20th, 1937, he was shot.
Shot? How badly?
Shot through the throat by an enemy sniper, an incredibly serious wound. The bullet missed his main artery by a millimeter. It effectively ended his ability to speak for a while and, obviously, his fighting career.
So he's invalided out. Time to go home.
Not quite so simple. While he was recovering, the Republican government, under intense communist pressure, formally suppressed the POUM. They declared it an illegal organization, started arresting its leaders and members, branding them fascist spies, Trotskyist traitors.
So he was now technically an enemy of the state he'd come to defend.
Exact. When he returned to Barcelona to get his discharge papers, he found the POUM headquarters closed, his comrades in hiding or arrested. He and his wife, Eileen, who had joined him in Spain in February, working for the ILP supporting the POUM, were in real danger.
How did they get out?
It was a close call. They had to lie low, eventually managing to get their passports validated by the British consulate. They crossed the border into France by train, essentially escaping just ahead of the political police. They genuinely feared arrest, imprisonment, possibly even execution by their own side.
This whole experience, Spain, it must have been utterly transformative.
Completely. It cemented his lifelong, bitter opposition to communism, specifically Stalin. He'd seen its methods firsthand. The lies, the propaganda, the political purges, the betrayal of revolutionary ideals in the name of centralized power.
And the manipulation of truth continued even after he left.
Yeah. When he got back to England and wrote an article based on his eyewitness account of the Barcelona fighting, explaining the political context, defending the POUM, he tried to get it published in the left-leaning New Statesman.
And they refused.
They rejected it. Why? Because, reportedly, they felt that publishing anything critical of the official Republican government line, even if true, would be harmful to the anti-fascist cause. It was dismissed as effectively pro-Franco propaganda.
So truth sacrificed for political expediency. Again.
Precisely. He saw that the control of information, the rewriting of history, wasn't just a tactic of the fascists or the Soviets abroad. It could happen within the left, within supposedly progressive circles in Britain, too. This was a profound lesson.
The seed of the Ministry of Truth right there.
You can absolutely see the direct line. The experience of having the truth suppressed because it was politically inconvenient was fundamental.
Okay, so he's back from Spain, deeply anti-Stalinist, disillusioned with parts of the left. Then World War II breaks out in 1939. How did he react?
Despite his previous anti-war positions before Spain, the rise of Hitler changed things. He saw Nazi Germany as an existential threat that had to be fought. So, driven by a sense of patriotic duty, he wanted to contribute to the war effort.
Oh, did he try to rejoin the military?
He tried, but his health was already poor, the lung issues, the neck wound. He wasn't deemed fit for active service, so he found other ways. He enthusiastically joined the local defense volunteers, soon renamed the Home Guard.
Gad's Army.
Pretty much. He joined a local company in St. John's Wood, apparently took it quite seriously, and was even promoted to sergeant.
And he was writing during this time, too, during the Blitz.
Yes, powerfully so. In 1941, he wrote The Lion and the Unicorn, Socialism and the English. It's a fascinating book, written right in the thick of the bombing.
What was his argument?
He argued that Britain's initial failures in the war, like the Dunkirk evacuation, weren't just military failures, but failures of a decadent, inefficient capitalist system and ruling class. He believed Britain could only truly win the war and build a better future if it underwent a socialist revolution, a patriotic, English form of social defended by the ordinary, the workers.
So still very much committed to socialism, but a specific anti-authoritarian kind.
Exactly. Democratic socialism, rooted in English traditions of fairness and liberty as he saw it. But his next job would give him another, perhaps even more direct experience with the mechanism control.
This is his time at the BBC.
Yeah. From August 1941 to November 1943, he worked as a talks producer in the Indian section of the service.
What did that involve?
He was essentially producing propaganda. He prepared and oversaw broadcasts, mostly news commentaries and cultural programs, aimed at audiences in India and other parts of Asia, particularly those under or threatened by Japanese occupation. The goal was to bolster support for the Allied war effort and counter enemy propaganda.
So he's inside the machine now, the government's information machine.
Right inside. And it became a master class in censorship and manipulation, but this time conducted by his own side.
How so? What were the constraints?
Well, India was politically explosive. The independence movement was gaining strength. Figures like Gandhi and Nehru were demanding Britain quit India. So anything broadcast to India had to be incredibly careful.
He couldn't just say what he thought.
Absolutely not. He constantly faced interference from the India office, the government department overseeing Indian affairs. They'd vet script, object to guests he invited, worry about phrasing that might seem sympathetic to Indian nationalism or critical of British rule. He had to tread a fine line.
It must have been deeply frustrating for someone like Orwell.
Hugely frustrating. He resented the bureaucratic meddling, the need to constantly self-censor, to spin the news, to avoid uncomfortable truths about the empire or the war. He felt compromised.
Did he think the work was even effective?
He became deeply cynical about it. He wrote in his diary in 1942 something like, "All we are doing at present is useless or slightly worse than." He doubted anyone was really listening or being persuaded by this heavily.
So again, he's seeing the state managing information, shaping narratives for political ends.
Exactly. He was witnessing the mechanisms of propaganda first deployed by the British government during the constant need to simplify, omit, or sometimes subtly falsify information to maintain morale or political. It was the daily reality of his job.
And this experience directly feeds into his later work.
Undeniably, the atmosphere of bureaucracy, the feeling of futility, the resentment at having to participate in what he saw as dishonest. You can feel the oppressive weight of that BBC experience informing the creation of the Ministry of Truth in 19. He resigned in November 19.
Why then specifically?
He basically said he felt his talents were being wasted. He wanted to focus on writing something more meaningful, something that could tell the truth, as he was fed up being, as he put it, a cog in a propaganda, and he had a specific project.
Which brings us to the final major phase, the period of his great warnings against totalitarianism, from about 1943 until his death in 1950.
Right. By the time he left the BBC, all the pieces were in place. He'd seen imperialism up close, lived through poverty, witnessed fascism's appeal, experienced the betrayal in Spain, and felt the constraints of wartime censorship in Britain.
He had the raw material.
And a driving conviction.
A core conviction that the foundation of totalitarianism wasn't just violence, but the systematic abuse of language to distort reality and control thought. He was ready to translate his Spanish Civil War conclusions, particularly his critique of Stalinism, into a powerful allegory.
Animal Farm.
Animal Farm. He wrote the manuscript during 1943 and 1944, and the story of trying to get it published is itself a perfect illustration of the very political pressures he was writing. It wasn't easy to find a publisher.
Yeah.
Even though the tide of the war was turning against Hitler.
Incredibly difficult. Remember, Stalin's Soviet Union was still a crucial ally against Nazis. Positive feelings towards Uncle Joe were actively encouraged by the British.
So publishing an anti-Soviet satire was problematic.
Highly problematic. Several publishers rejected it. Jonathan Cape, a major house, turned it down explicitly after consulting with someone at the Ministry.
The government advised against publishing.
Yes. An official apparently warned Cape that publishing a book so offensive to the Soviets damaged the wartime alliance. It was deemed politically unwise.
Wow. So the very system he's critiquing, state control over information, is actively trying to suppress his critique.
It's the ultimate ironies, and it must have felt like total validation. Eventually, a smaller publisher, Secker and Warburg, the risk, but they delayed publication until August 1945, after the war in Europe was over and the political landscape.
Let's talk about the allegory itself. How closely does it map onto the events he...
Devastatingly closely, especially drawing on Spain and the Russian Revolution. You have the animals overthrowing the human farmer, Mr. Jones, that's the initial revolution.
Okay.
Then you have the pigs taking charge. Napoleon, the ruthless boar, clearly represents Stalin. Snowball, the more intellectual, idealistic pig, represents Trotsky. Napoleon drives Snowball out, accuses him of treason, just as Stalin purged Trotsky.
And the mechanism of control.
That's where Squealer comes in. The brilliant, persuasive pig who acts as Napoleon's propaganda minister. Squealer's job is to constantly rewrite history, justify Napoleon's actions, change the commandments, and convince the other animals that everything is fine, even as their lives get worse. He embodies that abusive language Orwell feared.
And the end result.
Purges, executions of dissenting animals, the pigs gradually adopting all the vices of the humans they overthrew, walking on two legs, wearing clothes, drinking alcohol. They become the new ruling elite, indistinguishable from the old oppressed. It's the ultimate betrayal of the socialist principles the revolution supposedly stood for.
It's a powerful indictment of how power corrupts, regardless of ideology.
Absolutely. That was his core message, forged in the fires.
After Animal Farm's eventual success, he turned to his final major work.
Yes, 1984. But his health was deteriorating rapidly by this. He was suffering badly.
Yet he pushed himself to write it.
He seemed driven by this desperate urgency to get his final, most comprehensive warning down on paper. To achieve the solitude he needed, he moved to a remote farmhouse called Barnhill on the Scottish island of Jura.
Jura. That's really isolated.
Extremely isolated, windswept, difficult to reach. He lived there intermittently from 1946, often in quite primitive conditions, battling his illness while trying to write. Sources say he wrote much of the second draft literally against his doctor's orders, knowing it could worsen his condition.
That's incredible dedication. Now, the setting of 1984 is crucial, isn't it? It's not Russia.
No, and this is perhaps the most pointed, most chilling aspect. The novel is set in Airstrip 1, which is clearly a future dystopian version of England, specifically London, now part of the superstate Oceania.
So he's warning his own country, Britain, the West.
Direct. He's saying, don't think this can't happen here. The seeds of totalitarian control, the surveillance, the propaganda, the manipulation of language and history are present in our own society. He saw them taking root during the war in the bureaucracy and the censorship experience.
And the mechanisms of control he describes are terrifyingly detailed.
Absolutely. Big Brother, the omnipresent, mustachioed face of the party leader, watching you from posters and telescreens. The party itself, demanding total obedience. The thought police, listening in, ready to punish thought crime.
Those telescreens, two-way TVs that watch you back. Chilling.
And the constant surveillance, the erosion of privacy, it creates this atmosphere of perpetual fear and suspicion where even your own nervous system can betray.
Did he draw on specific real-world places for inspiration within the novel?
Yes, very direct. The Ministry of Truth miniature, the vast government building where the protagonist Winston Smith worked, revising history.
Yeah.
Its physical description is widely believed to be based on Senate House, the main administrative building of the university.
Senate House. Why that building?
Because during World War II, Senate House was actually the headquarters of the Ministry of Information, the government's propaganda and censorship department. Orwell likely visited it, maybe even worked with people there indirectly through the...
So he took the real building associated with wartime propaganda and made it the model for the place that literally manufactures lies in his dystopia.
Exactly. It's a huge, imposing, rather soulless white stone building. And the descriptions of the ministry's interior, the dreary corridors, the functional offices, are said to be reminiscent of the BBC office work. He weaponized the wartime bureaucracy.
Let's talk about Winston Smith, the protagonist. His journey is the core of the novel's tragedy.
It is. Winston works at the Ministry of Truth. His job is literally to falsify the past, rewriting old newspaper articles, destroying inconvenient records, ensuring history always conforms to the party's current narrative.
But he secretly rebels.
Secretly, yes. He hates the party, keeps a forbidden diary, starts an illicit affair with Julia, another party member who enjoys small acts of rebellion. They try to find a space for individual freedom, for truth, for love.
But it's ultimately hopeless.
In Orwell's vision, yes, they are inevitably caught by the thought police. Betrayed by someone they trust. They're taken to the Ministry of Love Minilove, which is, of course, the Center for Torture Anshin.
And Room 101.
Room 101, the place that contains the worst thing in the world, tailored to each individual prisoner's deepest. For Winston, it's rats. The purpose isn't just to make them confess. It's to break their spirit, to destroy their inner resistance, to make them betray their deepest loyalty.
And as it
does. Winston betrays Julia. The torture obliterates his independent self. The final devastating lines of the novel show him sitting in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, tracing 2 + 2 = 5, finally understanding, accepting, and even loving.
Complete psychological surrender, the death of the individual.
That was Orwell's ultimate warning. The potential for a system to not just control your act, control your thought, to make you accept lies as truth.
1984 was published in 1949. It cemented his fame, but his final years were incredibly difficult personally.
Yes, marked by profound loss and worsening health. His wife, Eileen, had died suddenly back in March 1945. She suffered cardiac failure during a routine hysterectomy, while Orwell himself was away in Paris, reporting on the end of the war.
And they had just adopted a son.
Yes, Richard. So he was suddenly a single parent, grieving while also trying to manage his own increasingly severe tuberculosis and finish his demanding final novel.
But the books were successful.
Immensely successful. Both Animal Farm and 1984 were huge commercial hits, finally bringing him financial security and recognition as a major literary figure, though tragically late.
And he married again right at the end.
He did. Knowing he was dying, confined to a hospital bed, he married Sonia Brownell in October 1949. She was a friend who worked at a literary magazine. Perhaps it was a hope for companionship, or maybe ensuring someone could manage his literary estate.
But the end came quickly after.
Very quickly. He was planning to travel to a sanatorium in Switzerland for treatment, hoping for some recuperation, but just 4 days before he was scheduled to leave on January 21st, 1950, he suffered a massive pulmonary hemorrhage in his hospital and died. He was only 40.
Such a short life, but what an impact. When you look back at everything we've discussed, the whole arc.
It's quite extraordinary, isn't it? You trace those 7 key pivots we talked about. The moral shadows of the colonial opium trade he was born, the class consciousness and shame forged at St. Cyprian, the first-hand experience of administering imperial brutality in Burma, the deliberate immersion in poverty and tramp, the political betrayal and violence witnessed in Spain, seeing fascism's persuasive power up close, and finally the direct experience of state censorship and propaganda.
Each one seems to have added a crucial layer to to his understanding of power and control.
Exact. His life became this unique, almost perfectly designed research project for dissecting how power operates, how it corrupts, and especially how it manipulates truth. He didn't just theorize about totalitarianism. He encountered its components throughout his life.
And crucially, he wrote about the mechanisms he saw emerging, not just in faraway dictatorships, but potentially within Western societies too.
Wow.
The falsification of history, the erosion of language, the surveillance state.
Yes, that's why setting 1984 in England was so vital. He wasn't just attacking Stalin or Hitler, he was issuing a warning about the potential for any system, even a democracy, to slide towards authoritarian control if it abuses language, suppresses dissent, and prioritizes power over truth.
Which brings us to that lingering debate about his legacy. He always identified as a socialist, right? A democratic.
Consistently. He insisted, particularly regarding Animal Farm in 1994, that his target was specifically Stalinism and totalitarian, the perversion of socialist ideal, not self.
But that's not always how his work was interpreted, especially during the Cold War.
No. Particularly in the United States, his books were widely promoted, sometimes even with funding from groups like the CIA, as powerful critiques of communism and, by extension, often conflated with an attack on all forms of socialism.
So his work was kind of weaponized against the very political causes he actually supported.
To a large extent, yeah. It's a complex legacy. He provided the right with powerful ammunition against the left, even though his own sympathies remained firmly on the democratic left.
So the question still hangs there. Was he primarily attacking authoritarianism in any guise, or did his powerful satires end up doing unintentional damage to the democratic socialist movements he believed?
It's a debate that continues, and there's no easy answer. He remains a profoundly influential figure, but one claimed and interpreted by different political sides.
When you think about it, the man born Eric Blair could have lived a quiet, respectable life as a colonial administrator, a defender of the system.
Instead, he used his unique position, experiencing both privilege and hardship, being both insider and outsider, to meticulously map the ways power could control not just bodies, but mind. He exposed the mechanics of the lie.
So thinking about his journey, his deep understanding of class, state power, propaganda surveillance, and remembering that 1984 was set in Airstrip 1, a warning to his own culture, it leaves us with a final thought.
A provocative one for you, our listeners, to consider. Given everything Orwell saw taking root, the wartime censorship, the political manipulation of truth, the beginnings of surveillance, what systems of control or manipulation operating in our world today would he identify as the most pressing, the most dangerous threats to objective truth? And what would Big Brother look like?